As we've discussed earlier in the week, would we wind up with 74 shot and 11 dead this weekend in Chicago?
75 shot, 13 killed.
13, 75 and 13 now. And, of course, it's not just weekends. So we had incidents at 31st Street Beach and elsewhere yesterday.
Last night at a Southside gas station, they had a teen takeover. And it took a lot of people were arrested, but it took a while for them to.
And we've seen the videos that have become just part of the summer experience in Chicago. Young people twerking in front of police cars and otherwise behaving badly. Just a bad look for the city and a bad look for law enforcement. It makes the police look impotent, and that's conveyed throughout the city and the region. So what's to be done? Well, let's find out what BLM Brandon is doing. Part of that is the personnel choices he makes. A lot of people were initially optimistic that maybe he would back off some of the Maoist rhetoric and do sensible things when he named his chief of staff, and that chief of staff was a harken back to the Daley administration. But what you've seen in terms of senior level personnel around that chief of staff, who was ostensibly hired to manage the preparation for the DNC next year, and perhaps not much more, because what you see around him are red apparatchiks, basically. And that includes his newly minted deputy mayor for community safety. For more on that gentleman, we're pleased to be joined by Florian Sohnke, who is the Chicago Contrarion, commentary on urban affairs in Chicago. Florian Sohnke, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy. Pleased to be back.
Tell us about Garion Gatewood.
I think it's probably best to start with the period between Johnson's election and his inauguration. We had the image makers over at the Chicago Teachers Union and the SEIU present us not with a union organizer or a former middle school teacher, but as the secular reincarnation of the Lord, and who had been elected mayor. In his transition period, we saw, I think, the appointment of 400 people to the committee itself and subcommittees. It was all overhyped. It was just puffed up union officials who were filling the ranks of this transition. I think you had mentioned there was some hope there might be Johnson would be backing away from some of this Marxist language. No chance. And after some lengthy discussion with Alyssa Rosenbaum and Marty Pribe, two contributors, we looked at the number of people who Johnson had appointed to his staff over at City Hall, and some of them were, as Alyssa pointed out, the common thread of his key appointees was the lack of skill and no real competence to be carrying out the responsibilities of the office to which they were appointed. You just have union organizers who are holding key positions in government. And when I spoke to Marty Pribe, we had conversation about his appointees to community safety and corporation counsel. And these two positions, held by Mary Richardson Lowry, and Garion Gatewood, were deeply troubling to us. Now, to Mayor Lightfoot's credit, as staggering and incompetent as Miss Lightfoot was as mayor, she did have an excellent pick as corporation counsel in Mark Flessner. Flessner was fighting many of the lawsuits launched against the city. And it's a sue and settle racket. You have people who are suing the city of Chicago for outrageous sums of money for ridiculous charges. And Flessner was fighting these in court, and even though we weren't victorious in many of them, the litigants were getting away with much less money than they had under Rahm Emanuel, who would greenlight every settlement.
All right,
but
so
we thought,
okay, but so I get the piece with the jackpot justice plays in Cook County, or to a generally compliant jury pool. But your point about fighting it and actually reducing the cost of taxpayers is noteworthy. But Gary and Gatewood, the deputy mayor of community safety, when I read that he served as a law clerk with the Southern Poverty Law Center, I kind of tuned out, because we know what that is. That's just a leftist front group that calls all conservative groups white supremacists. But so tell me about this guy and the kind of impact he will have on the administration.
Well, like I said, the Lowry and Gatewood were the toughest, or the most difficult to swallow, because despite the fact he does have a law degree, he has spent his entire career as an apologist for juvenile offenders. And if you look at his resume, it has been activism on behalf of juvenile criminal offenders. And we believe his position as deputy mayor of community safety is really just a sheen over a position where he will use the office to marginalize police, to rewrite police policy, to remove critical leverage from police as they attempt to carry out their duties, to rewrite, as I stated in the essay, rewrite policy, particularly on foot or vehicular pursuit, to continue to limit police discretionary authority, and to really help facilitate the emergence and the increase of peacekeepers and violence interrupters to take over police responsibilities. That's what we believe his role is.
Right, but don't you think Mayor Johnson already believes that? I mean, between when he was elected and when inaugurated, he said about the teenage takeovers that those were just silly kids.
Yes, but this is the official way he's going to do it, by creating a whole new position to eventually replace police. They're going to increase their ranks. They're going to go out and recruit peacekeepers and violence interrupters to slowly move into police positions and assume more police responsibility. And this is going to cause a very serious problem on the streets. These are unarmed peacekeepers who have no real, they don't merit the respect the way police should, but this eventually is what his position is all about. And it's actually kind of Orwellian in some respect, because he's also going to be keeping an eye on police. They're going to be looking for ways to discredit police.
Well, I mean, just starting from premises here too. I mean, these two, BLM Brandon and his community deputy mayor for community safety here, this Gary and Gatewood. I mean, just premise. They start from a premise that the problem on the west side and the south side is over policing, too much policing, right?
Absolutely. I think Johnson's worldview is the south and west sides have suffered from over-policing for decades, and it ended up in the mass incarceration we hear about. And it's completely false. If you have any conversation with the law-abiding residents in those high-crime neighborhoods, they are desperate for a police presence. They want police there. They want the criminals removed from the streets. And he doesn't believe this. There's more sympathy for criminals under Johnson, and certainly with Lightfoot, than there ever will be for the law-abiding.
And I know Martin Priebe talks to police routinely, and so the anticipation from police who will speak honestly and off the record about what this summer will be, is it going to be just weekend after weekend of what we saw this past weekend?
I think so. I believe Marty also believes so. We have I've got police contacts. I think we're just under 300 homicides. I think we're around 280 for the month or for the year. They believe the bloodletting is going to continue, and it's because there is no serious effort to combat the number one root cause of crime on the south and west sides, which is gang violence. And, as I stated in my essay, we're going to have more and more conversations about root causes, and we will ignore the main driver, gang violence and a criminal, deliberate choice to engage in a life of crime. We often hear about how it's racism and poverty and disinvestment and school closures. It's nothing about a deliberate choice. Crime pays in Cook County. It has for many years. It's paid handsomely in the past 5 or 6 years because we have a court system which does not prosecute. We have judges who refuse to hold violent criminals in jail. And now we've got a mayor who has appointed a specialist in apologia for violent youth criminals.
He is Florian Sohnke, the Chicago Contrarion, which provides commentary on urban affairs in Chicago. Do check it out, the Chicago Contrarion. Florian, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest growing independently owned business bank. It's a bank where relationships still matter. Signature Bank knows your name and your story. I'm Dan Proft, and I know this because Signature Bank is my business bank.
I'm Mick McDonnell, co-founder of Configure One, a global leader in configure, price, and quote software for manufacturers, and a new customer of Signature Bank. Configure One recently came to Signature Bank for a loan under the Paycheck Protection Program after our previous business bank of